This summer I would swim, this summer I would have drowned. I held my breath, I kicked my feet and flicked my arms and frowned. I didn't push my arms around. Happy Thursday!
Why do we need the concept of rights of nature?
It shows you all of southern waters legally allowed discharge points. There's 123 of them. Now this is the map of all of the discharge points. So there's 1,244 of them.
A lot of what is happening to our rivers by the water companies is already illegal. They're making hundreds of millions of pounds out of breaking the law, and they get away with it because the enforcement is not there.
This summer I swam in a river, I swam in a river Ouse. I fancy to southern water, I had to dodge the booze, I had to dodge the booze. This summer I swam in the ocean, when I swam in a river before. So tomorrow it's pouring in my eyes, I'm a self-destructive fool. I'm a self-destructive fool. This summer I did the barrister, and you know that that's not all. I think the French are the one of the fly, and the old Australian crow. The old Australian crow. This summer I started hardly face in a reservoir to boots. I did fancy I was informal, and a formal I wore my suit. I wore my swimming suit. This summer I had been swimming, this summer I had a drown. My breath and beat my feet and I move my arms around. I move my arms around.
Hey!
Wow.
Yep, we did. Adur. In Lewes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hurrah. Welcome. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming for today. My name is Tasha Padbury, and I'm from Lavar Ouse. And that was just a short video that we thought we'd like to start with, which was our launch event that we partnered up with the Railway Land Wildlife Trust last September to put on a river festival for the River Ouse. I'd like to start with a little reading, which I have merged from a number of sources, from the wonderful books of the River Folk Tales, Sussex River, and the River's Voice. I am the arteries that are spread across our earth, from source to babbling brook, down through floodplain to the sea. I am the lifeblood of our landscape, shaping our environment and being shaped in turn. I am complicated. I'm not just a channel of water. I am part of an entire water system involving the sky, the land, and the sea. I am a myriad of spring-fed short streamlets flowing down from forest. I flow in the main peacefully through rural landscape. I skirt villages, run through towns who built themselves on my banks. I am vast and wide. I am a busy harbour. I am wetlands, ponds, aquifers, estuaries and marine habitats. I reflect what you put into the water and what you take out. I clean, drain, wash and dilute. I transport you, create energy, and give you water to irrigate your crops. I soothe you, inspire you, and give you space to play. What might be hidden under the surface? I provide a flow of inspiration and imagination. You acknowledge the power of me and walk alongside me to find peace. Wonder at my journey to the sea, travelling to wide expanse and endless possibility. I am the water vole, the kingfisher, sea trout and damselfly. I am the river, and the river is me. So welcome again today. It's amazing to have you all in the room, and I hope that's broadly sets the scene and the tone and the focus for our day today. It's really, we have very busy lives, so it's amazing to have you all in this room for the day, and we really appreciate your time. So Love Our Ouse have been on an amazing journey so far, and it's a privilege and honour to spend time with so many types of people with such skills, expertise, determination and passion for our rivers. We have specifically invited each of you here today because of the valuable contribution we think you're already making and think that you can offer today and hopefully for the rivers in the future. Today is a day to immerse ourselves in the rights of nature movement and the opportunities it offers our rivers, which we know are in crisis. Today is a day to explore, share, learn and collaborate. We hope this will be a forum for being open, inquisitive, inclusive, critical and challenged. The rights of nature and rivers is still new for all of us, and we all come with different perspectives and experiences. Every voice is welcome and deserves respect. And let's try to keep in mind those who are not represented here in this very human-centric space. The ooze, I've brought a bucket of ooze with us here today. So the ooze is in the room. And let's also bear in mind that it's a bit tricky to bring kingfishers and the trout and the mullet here. So can we keep in mind them in the space today too, please? A bit of housekeeping. Today is being recorded and filmed and documented in a variety of ways. We have a wonderful Mani here who is making the second in a trilogy of Rights of Rivers podcasts. So she'll be recording sounds as part of our documentation. We also have Sam here who is filming the whole day. If you do not wish to be featured, please have a word with him and we can make sure that you're not featured in the day. A few other things. We will be making everything we document from the day available, accessible to you all and to the general public. And I'm going to go through just a quick few thank yous before we start. We've had a huge amount of support through sponsors and partners that we've been working on to bring this day to you, including the Ouse Valley Climate Action Project, which is a big lottery-funded local, big exciting climate action project. So thank you very much for your huge amount of support today. To the Railway Land Wildlife Trust, who have play a huge part in what Love Our Ouse does, and locally our natural nature reserves. The Environmental Law Foundation, Lewes District Council, and last but not least, the wonderful local Abyss Brewery, who are providing beer for us at the end of this long day. So a quick run through of the day, just very briefly. We will be having three fascinating and interesting, amazing talks this morning, followed by a break time out back in the gallery. And then we're going to come back for one more presentation, and then we have a panel discussion where you can ask questions and hear some answers from local and national experts on rights of rivers and the Ouse. This afternoon, after lunch that we'll have back in the gallery, we'll be taking a short guided walk and there'll be workshops in the Linklater Pavilion at the Railway Land, so we won't all be stuck in the room. Today we'll be getting some fresh air, seeing some actual water and the Ouse itself, and then getting involved in interactive workshops for the afternoon. At 5 o'clock we'll finish, and then the drinks are on us, so hope you'll join us for a nice glass of beer. And I think that is everything. Have I missed anything, Laurie's crew? Great. So we're going to start with our first keynote speaker today, who is delivering a talk called Empowering Nature, the Rise of Rights of Nature. Today, this is brought to us via the amazing technology of online Zooming, and is going to be delivered by Mika Peck, who's a Professor of Conservation Ecology at Sussex University. A little bit about Mika. So Mika Peck's work is dedicated to the conservation through scientific research and grassroots conservation action. His scientific progress is on the development of new tools to monitor the state of the environment, from tropical rainforest reefs to UK kelp forests. Science is integrated within community-based approaches to explore opportunities for sustainable livelihoods in biodiversity hotspots in South America, Southeast Asia, and in the UK. In 2022, he founded a not-for-profit organisation called Ecoforensics CIC to support communities, protect areas and indigenous territories in collecting ecological information to protect ecosystems under the emerging Rights of Nature legislation. So please put your hands together and give Mika a warm welcome.
Hello. We need to test the technology first. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Is that a yes? I can see you. I've got a little camera in the corner. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Let me share screen. This is the next stage that I have to pass. I don't know if you get anywhere. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so I know you've got the thumbs up. Can you see that? Yeah, joy. Okay. First of all, thanks very much. I'll put my timer on. I know I've been given 20 minutes, which is a real privilege. First of all, an amazing event that's been organised here today. I think it's part of the great revolution, but we'll come to that. So I'm going to start the talk with a question, which is, are current legal frameworks effective in the conservation of biological diversity? As a conservation biologist, that's my sort of main interest. And sadly, I can pick up anything really from the scientific literature, and it points to the answer being no. This is an extinction risk map here, and it shows everything's got an extinction risk and is increasing its extinction risk. So we are facing a biodiversity and a climate crisis wherever you look. So in the face of this climate and biodiversity, dual crisis, has the time come to break the law, which is what recent program by Chris Packer might see on TV. Maybe we should rephrase that. I think this is what we're doing here today. Is it time maybe to change the law? So that's the question I suppose we need to pose. And I'm going to draw heavily on a privileged experience I've had since 1995 working in Ecuador. Ecuador integrated the rights of nature within its constitution in 2008. So it's a world leader. It's ahead of anywhere else in the terms of the legal framing of this. The constitution is, of course, the law of the laws, so all the other laws should obey that framework. It's based on indigenous visions of development as well. So the concept of summa causa, or good living. So it fundamentally challenges many sort of anthropocentric or human-focused development pathways. If you can see on the right here, there are a number of articles that are incorporated in the Constitution. And there are a few of those we haven't got time to go through all, but a few such as nature has the right to maintain and regenerate life cycles, structure, functions, evolutionary processes. Now, the reality, that's where the legal team left us, and us ecologists, really, that's our field, I suppose. So we have an obligation then to fill into what does that mean and how do you define impacts to it, for example. But basically, it has the right to be fully respected. Of course, there's other things like the state must avoid species extinction. I'll come back to how important those things were in a number of global cases. So let's think about the alternatives. It's wonderful seeing this happen on my doorstep. I am based at the University of Sussex, just on the road, but unfortunately I'm today in Cornwall, so I couldn't make it. But I think I'm going to talk about 3 ideas and concepts that we've worked with at the university over the last 20 years or so, which are called underpinned by the rights of nature. But the idea of citizen science or civic science and the concept of para-ecologists, which are local community members, and both the paramedics of the climate and biodiversity crisis, if you want. That's the best way of framing it. Local people trained to deal with local emergencies. And underpinning that, they all collect information on things called ecological forensics. Same way you have it for a human case. Collecting ecological forensics, putting it together to generate a case, a legal case, to protect their ecosystems under the rights of nature. It's kind of the framing I've got here with these 3 different concepts. But bear with me. It's meant to be a sort of an idea session, isn't it? So let's throw them out. So when you deal with conservation issues, such as we are here, it's a wicked problem. It's not a simple end-of-pipe solution. And that's really what's got us in the mess in the first place, literally, when it comes to the universe. But my interest lies with community level. What should we do at this level? Because there's some great initiatives at international level that get sieved through the national governments that can end up having a very different flavour to what solution could be at local level. And then also the sense of engagement. I think a lot of us feel very disengaged and disempowered. So I think it's very important to bring that along in this revolution that we call the rights of nature. I've got a lovely diagram, as always good science, a lot of diagram, but this is basically looking at citizen science and its transition over to a thing called civic science, which is what we work on in our para-ecologist models. Simple citizen science often gathers data. I, as a scientist, write something, give it to a policymaker. Policymaker makes change, the world's a better place. But that doesn't happen particularly, well, it doesn't even happen in the UK often. It doesn't happen particularly in very remote areas where governance structures are often missing, for example, biodiversity hotspots, rainforests of Ecuador. So the thing has to happen locally. So the transition is driven by the communities themselves. I think the same would apply with Adur here. And this can address this approach of engaging with science, but having open and emergent goals, not going in directly with a key thing, I want to measure this is what we're going to do. Being open to change and participatory co-creation is the key. So it's a mix of anthropology with science, with arts, with all sorts of other things as well. And it can address, I think, the para-ecologist model, which is the civic science model as well, I see, it can address these wicked problems. So just to give you an idea, para-ecologists, they are local champions, basically. We identify that they're trained in collecting scientific information and communicating that information. We learn as much from them as they learn from us. It's a very horizontal experience. You have some examples here from the worked in Indonesia on reef systems. We've got some in Ecuador. We look at water quality associated with para-ecologists defending themselves from mining activity. And this is the last training course in one of our training centres called Central Cienza. It can generate significant benefits socially as well, because the concept of using science within ecotourism works very well as well. So fundamentally, though, it's important that it incorporates local knowledge and scientific approaches. And the idea there is it's a more horizontal approach. It's not a top-down one. It's a co-production of solutions in a real sense. And it does, in my opinion, from our experience at power transitions. So the experience is gathered really in biodiversity hotspots. My work has been mostly in Ecuador, in these 3 reserve systems here, but also in Indonesia, in West Papua, looking at coral reef systems, and also in Papua New Guinea with another group at Sussex, led by Alan Stewart, who'd been running this model for just about 2000 as well. And it's won the United Nations Development Programme Equator Prize in 2015. So it's recognised and it works in a very interesting manner to enable transition of local governance for conservation benefit. I'm going to focus on Ecuador. It's the place where I fell in love, if you want to use that word. I think it's the appropriate word for our engagement with nature. I fell in love with the cloud forests of northwest Ecuador in 1995 when I first visited. It's a mega diverse country. It has the highest number of mammals per square kilometre. Birds, it's right on there. It's like the size of something like England. It's on par with Brazil, Colombia, and Peru. So it's as a biologist, it's one of the places with the highest biodiversity and also some of the highest rates of deforestation and loss. So if you can make it work there, that's a pretty good test bed for anywhere else, maybe. But it does have some unique flavours to it as well. It has 2 biodiversity hotspots, critical biodiversity hotspots running through it, as you can see here. So that's a really a marker of its threat to the ecosystem, but also to its value. So it started really in 2005 when I was running wrote a UK government grant and managed to get it, couldn't believe it, called PrimeNet, to develop a sustainable network of primate conservation in Ecuador. And it was focused around this particular species here, this critically endangered brown-headed spider monkey. There were about 250 left in the world when we started. We didn't know where they went. So the mission was to find where it was and do something about it. And we're using innovative techniques like sound here to record their presence and absence and call it observably. So it all started, and this will come back in this talk to a very, very interesting place called the Los Cedros Protected Forest, where I visited in 1995 with a small little expedition. Then went back and we ran the first paraecologist training session here in Los Cedros. And that led on to a number of other successes. So here to the southeast, we have the Santa Lucia Cloud Forest Reserve that runs around the paraecologist model and brings in about 80% of its income for the community through this idea of science and research. But also the Tesoro Escondido Reserve. This is where we found probably about 180 of the global population, they estimated at 250 of brown-headed spider monkeys. And through a process that wasn't as simple as just providing the scientific information, I can assure you, we managed to create a reserve that's community run, led by my ex-PhD student, Citlali Grelos, which is really focused on using the paraecologist model, and it works on gender issues very well as well. So it's a very interesting application of women's empowerment in running direct to the reserve. So this is the Tesoro Reserve, well, brown-headed spider monkey is still represented there. So, I mean, all to say that the paraecologist model worked very well for these conservation challenges. The problem was scaling. So you go to a community and you say, well, let's do some science. It's quite a hard sell. So that's the challenge in a way. We have these examples and it's working very well globally. I'll weave this back to the rights of nature eventually, I do assure you. So, things are all hunky-dory, things are looking great. Then in 2017, a series of mining concessions that overlay most of Ecuador, most countries, in fact, or most areas, threatened the Los Cedros Reserve. This is the Los Cedros Reserve in red here. It's 60 square kilometers of some of the most biodiverse forest system in the world. And these mining concessions suddenly threatened it. We're dealing with something like 242 endangered species at risk of extinction. So endemic that the single valley there means loss of species and extinction in this particular environment. The beautiful thing, and in a way I came late to this, to the whole rights of nature. I didn't really see it coming as early as I should have done. In 2008, Ecuador incorporated rights of nature within its constitution, as I kind of showed in that first slide. And it changes from an anthropocentric view, with humans having more rights than other animals, other creatures, to one where we are part of nature, a more ecocentric approach, where nature is now a subject under law. I mean, everyone thinks it's kind of, for their first look, it's kind of insane. But then you say, well, hang on, corporations are represented as subjects, people as well, so that's matter. Not an object under law. Okay? But now, what happened was, the director of the reserve, Jose was one of the few people I can imagine who would do this, who put a court case together to defend himself against the mining company that incorporated rights of nature. And it was taken up by the Constitutional Court in Ecuador as a precedent-setting legal process. And in 2021, the court basically used the rights of nature to remove a mining threat from Los Cedros because one of the components was its impact to the rights of nature. It ruled in favour of Los Cedros against that large-scale copper and gold mine. Protecting 242 endangered species, we're estimating about 6.2 million tonnes of carbon was maintained in the biosphere as a result. So this was a huge deal. This was a kind of a click moment in a way. We contributed as scientists kind of in our spare time, our evenings, and we presented during the actual hearing. I can see also a few other people who presented. There's Monica, I think I can see you, Monica, there. Well, did an amazing job by presenting nature in that court case as well. What was really interesting was that the scientific evidence that, for example, I put forward was generated by the paraecologist. It was the role and the function of this particular primate in maintaining forest structure. So that's one of the components. They're also critically endangered, risk of extinction. So that's another component that swayed the decision. Here's an example of training some paraecologists in 2005 in Los Cedros. We've had a number of successes since then as well. So it's triumphed just next to Los Cedros in a place called Junín, The Lurimagua project was one of the largest open planned copper mine projects planned here. There's been a community protecting and defending it for 30 years. I've been involved since about 2007, and it's a long fight against multiple transnationals, and then Delco, the Chilean mining company, state mining company. And we've won a recent suspension on that project at the moment as well. So what we're seeing is that application of ecological information within rights of nature cases, generated ideally by the communities themselves, because that's part of the challenges, would be an extremely powerful mechanism. This shows an example of how powerful frog information in this case is. Frogs are very endemic to Ecuador, hyper-diverse. You impact a single valley or mine, for example, you may cause extinctions, which you're not allowed to do under the Constitution. So there you go. That's very simple. More challenging is structure, how that's affected and function, evolutionary process. But we have a whole new academic realm, which I'm suggesting should be called ecological forensics, to support the book and the law with academic ecology, or ecologists and lawyers come together to actually speak the same language, because we're learning as we go. So, as you know, rights of nature is emerging globally. It's like it's an emergent thing, like an evolutionary process in response to where we are, I suppose, with different flavors. Ecuador has a reactive one. In New Zealand, you have a very different flavor where the Wanganui River is represented in personhood, and has the local traditional owners are represented in meetings. They represent the river. Very different flavor to Ecuador, where anyone, including myself, even as a foreigner, could represent nature in Ecuador, but it's much more reactive in Ecuador than proactive. So maybe we need to think with the River Lewes, which will be the best model. But we do know there's an urgent need for ecological information for these cases, at least for the reactive model, nothing else, but I think for all levels. And there's also a challenge of translating what we do as ecologists, which I think is everyday language, into that understood by legal practitioners and people as well, legal process. But the one thing is, if you want to go to a community and say, let's do some ecological science to protect your ecosystem from the threats, that's suddenly a different seller to trying to do a little bit of science and a conservation focus, single point focus. So we're seeing an explosion in interest in the idea of building capacity of local people to actually engage in the legal process and protect and defend themselves from an emerging threat, which is fundamentally extractivism in Ecuador, at least. The reality was that we need to set up an organisation. So we were doing this in our spare time as scientists, retired scientists in the States, P.T. Roy, putting all the science together for the Los Cedros case, and that wasn't sustainable. The fact that we were winning these cases against the state of Ecuador and state mining companies was testament to the power of this potential approach. So we established, with the support of Sussex University, and we've got a number of funding as well from other funders, called Eco Forensic. It's a CIC, community interest company, and the idea is to make an organisation to basically bring together this network and capacity of local communities to generate the ecological forensics to actually work with lawyers and then build legislative protection, so build up resilience through knowledge of their environments. The thing I'm working on right now, which is why I'm here on writing retreat here, is actually working out what's the scale of the problem. There's Los Cedros. All the red are mining concessions that overlay Ecuador. The green are protected areas. The dark green are the similar status as Los Cedros, where the government had given the changed the law to allow mining below ground. So effectively, what's the scale of the win? We could potentially apply Los Cedros ruling to 4,700 plus square kilometers of Ecuador now, and then 6,500 square kilometers of indigenous territories, and also native forest outside it, but that's even more. But what's lacking in the majority of all of these, there's no information on the ecology. So we're working with a number of communities from Paramo, which is a high altitude sort of grassland, all the way down to the Amazon rainforest, the Shuar at the moment, to try and develop a training program that's specifically designed for their communities to collect the ecological forensic data, work with our legal team in Ecuador, the Global Alliance of Rights of Nature, and to build cases to defend themselves from these concessions, ideally to remove the concession from these high biodiversity areas. And it's worth noting, these concessions have popped up due to our demand for heavy metals as part of the transition. So critical ecosystems are now being attacked in the name of extractivism for these critical metals. We do have a dilemma. As I said, there's no information on the majority of those threatened ecosystems, and we need this ecological forensics really for these places to effectively defend themselves under this wonderful wonderful rights of nature legislation that Ecuador does have. So this is the concept. This is the para-ecologist. There's a lovely visuals drawn by Sousa Patos, an amazing Ecuadorian artist, and art plays a huge part, I think, in this communication of what we do, because it can be so dry, both the science and the law. So we do need really a lot of help from the artists. As you can see, these are two para-ecologists embedded in their environment, collecting a number of different things that could be relevant for a rights of nature case. And we basically go to these ecosystems. We're currently in the innovative stage where we're trying to work out what ecological information do we need, how can we put cases together, and how effective is that going to be. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of leave it there really, and just to say that the rights of nature is an emerging approach to address the biodiversity and climate crisis. It changes the way we engage, the way we see ourselves within nature as well. And as said by one of the judges in the Los Cedros case, it's like what happened 200 plus years ago with the French Revolution, where the end of absolute monarchies, well, apart from Britain, was occurring and leading on to liberal democracies. It's a project that's still working, we're still working on that. But the same thing happened in 2008 in Ecuador with the constitutional integration of the rights of nature. I see that's a revolution. I also see the River Ouse. Obviously in the UK, this is a fairly unique moment in time in history. Equivalent of Thomas Paine's role in promoting the rights of man, the rights of the rivers. So I'm hoping this will be the revolution that we hope to see. There will be one led by nature and represented by, fully representing nature in the process as well. It's expanding globally, so things are happening, but we do also need to now today think about how you're going to implement this. We don't want this to become swallowed up by bureaucracy. We want it to represent people. We want that energy and that I suppose the human will to want to have a better world, to allow anyone to engage in it as well. So that's my concern. It's going to become a technical process rather than something that's really inspirational. But integrating with the para-ecologist approach might be something we can apply to the UK, might not, something we can decide and I suppose talk about the next few weeks and years as this hopefully comes to fruition. So I suppose the question is, can some of this experience be applied in some form to restore and protect the River Ouse, where I suppose restoration is our key in the UK. And under the rights of nature, one of the things is that nature has the right for restoration as well. Right, I'm going to leave you at that. I wish I could be there. I'm really missing not engaging with you today, but I'm hoping that in a future event we all get a chance to meet each other. I know I'm now on 20 minutes, so I'm going to wish you adieu.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mika Peck. Really lovely to have you on the massive screen here. You're looking very large. Thank you so much for that really amazing start to our summit today. And good luck with all the writing. Try and ignore the world and get your head down.
Thanks, Tash. It's wonderful to have you, Tash, organise this. I know you've been to Santa Lucia in earlier days. It's nice to see you back there in Ecuador as well, to get inspiration from Princess Lewis.
Absolutely. All the best. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Add up. Fantastic. So our second talk today is called The Guardianship of the Atrato River. I hope I pronounced that correctly. In Colombia, and the parallels with the River Ouse. Today's talk, this talk will be delivered by the wonderful Monica Feria-Tinta. So Monica is a specialist in public international law and developed expertise in rights of nature and protection of biodiversity. Monica is considered to be one of the preeminent experts in climate change and environmental litigation worldwide. She is an experienced litigator in environmental law matters and has acted in several cases concerning protection of rivers. She acted in the first groundbreaking Rights of Nature Los Cedros case, mentioned in Mika's talk there, before the Constitutional Court of Ecuador, which was the first case law to fully integrate rights of nature concepts within its constitution. Monica has very generously been providing pro bono support in the development of a rights for the river a charter for the Ouse under the instruction of the Environmental Law and Foundation and Love Our Ouse. So please welcome Monica to the stage. Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes? Well, I'm very honored to be today with you for this kind invitation and, in fact, being part of this initiative. I'm going to focus on three aspects in my intervention. I'm going to pick up a bit from what Mika has already introduced, but I'd like to start by an introduction which somehow sets a little bit the context in which we are discussing the river Ouse rights. And the context is the following. The horrors of the war during the Second World War created a shock consciousness of humanity in such a way that the world and the international community decided to negotiate and set up international treaties that acknowledged human rights. So all the human rights that we currently enjoy and comes from this major initiative to have treaties from the Universal Declaration onto the European Convention on Human Rights are in fact the result of that initiative and the awareness that we needed to set the standards to better protect human life. Now, curiously, because of this perhaps focus that we had back then on human life, we had two parallel processes. We unfortunately divided human rights from what we have since understood to be environmental law. Environmental law, in fact, developed far later. And it developed first as well as in the form of soft law or declarations. Now, these declarations have taken place from 1972 onwards. But I want to stop at a key moment which somehow had become forgotten, but nevertheless, I think what we are experiencing at present is the need to go back to that specific model, which actually happened in 1982. Now, so the 1972 reference was a Stockholm Declaration. Many of you may be aware of that. I see a lot of students here. But in 1982, we had a particular declaration that actually is called the Charter for the Earth. Now, I emphasize this because this was actually adopted by the United Nations, by all the states that form part of the United Nations, including the UK. And when it was adopted, it was voted for the majority. 111 states voted for the adoption of this declaration, the UK included. And what did that declaration say? In the preamble it said, mankind is part of nature, and life depends on the uninterrupted functioning of natural systems. At another point it says, every form of life is unique, guaranteeing respect regardless of its worth to man. And far later it discussed general principles where, for example, it said, nature shall be respected and its essential processes shall not be impaired. This was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. Unfortunately, we lost this path because a decade later, we got the Rio Declaration, which is fundamental and important, but which went back to a homocentric perspective. This was the ecocentric perspective that looked at life in its value, but in all the forms of life were considered important. Now, why did this came about? Because of the recognition already by humanity that post-industrialization could cause a serious issue concerning ecological harm and potentially to the future of the world in itself. And I want to submit today, and in general, that this is what we need to do. We need to retrace the 1982 moment and embrace it, because that's where the war was getting it right. And maybe now we are living the very moment similar to the moment that created all these important standards at the level of protections of human life. We are maybe coming to understand the importance to also combine human life with other forms of life. So let me now move on to my example, which has already been introduced by Mika, but I just briefly want to say the following about this. On Los Cedros case. Los Cedros was not a national park. Los Cedros is a private land. Now, why? How come? It was like it has happened here. Someone that had money wanted to protect an area, bought it, and it created a kind of park as a result, but it's essentially private. Now, the government has in Ecuador the possibility, owns the soil nevertheless, and that's how they came to grant a concession. Why is it interesting? And I'm talking here from the perspective of a lawyer, of a barrister, so I'm going to make comments that probably are different from the ones that Mika just made. When I was first contacted with this case, the key and novel issue for me was that there was no one living in this forest. So there were no communities, inhabitants, indigenous peoples. I was very used to advise and work with issues of consultation. But here there was nothing really about consultation, because you cannot consult the monkeys, or you cannot consult the amazing life that Mika just draw to our attention to. And this is what the government had done. They kind of thought, well, there is no one to consult, therefore we just go ahead and grant the concessions. The concessions were for a Canadian company together with a company from the state to explore and start exploiting, if possible, gold and other minerals, which would be extremely destructive to the life in Los Cedros. So this is where I pause, because my entire task became really to advocate for a client that I had never had before alone, and it was nature. And I realized when I was drafting my submissions that I was really, had become really a barrister for the earth. Now, this is where the concept became so important. If you don't have human life around, this war, it had not been for the Constitution of Ecuador, this world, this fantastic world, would have simply been destroyed. Now, you may wonder, but how come if they had a constitution, they nevertheless were okay with destroying it? Because of the technicalities, because here is where the technicalities, and we lawyers, those who are here, lawyers, know that very well. The Los Cedros was not in the high ranking of forests, the protected ones. It was just another forest, and that they had made on purpose lose a ranking of protection so that, it was considered not protected under their internal legislation. But I said, it doesn't matter. That's what I told the judges. It doesn't matter whether, you don't have a particular name for this that tells you how important it is. The science proves that this place has particularities that trigger the protection of the Constitution. Because, for example, we learn about the extinction of a species. That's something that the Constitution prohibits. Therefore, it cannot be explored in the way it is proposed. I'm lucky to have counted with so much scientific evidence. Mika referred to the hearing, and the hearing was really about that. It was about proving that this fell within the protection of the Constitution. And on the basis of that, we won that case. And I think it's a historic case for the world, because one thing is that you may have very pretty provisions in a constitution. Another thing is that you actually implement it. And for the first time, this was construed in a way that had set, I think, a landmark for the future. But this leaves us with the following. So what about other places in the world? What happens with that? And I'll tell you this. I was posed here with a dilemma. Tort law. I work often in extraterritorial cases, and many extraterritorial cases come to the UK in the form of disputes before the High Court, etc., and the commercial courts. And this case in particular was that there was serious harm to a forest, but that forest didn't have communities living in. And for the English law firm that wanted to bring the case, they couldn't find the client. They couldn't, because under English law, when it comes to tort law, there has to be an injury to a person, to a human person. Does that mean that therefore, in our own conception of what should be protected, you can destroy DNA that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world with no legal consequences? No, I leave that dilemma there for you. This is the river in Los Cedros. There were a number of rivers, water that was uncontaminated, one of the most pristine waters in the world, and that eventually will go down and provide water for a huge amount of communities. So strategically, I also raised the issues of right to water in this context. These are two species from Los Cedros, and I point out the right one because, in particular, because it's the beloved bear that we all know as the Peruvian bear in the children's stories here, but it's called the Andean bear in Peru. Here is the Paddington bear. And I now want to go to what really is the center of my talk today, and that is the example of the Trato River. The constitutional case of Ecuador is fantastic. That's how a model that is working in some jurisdictions. In Colombia, there is no constitutional right of nature. And yet something fantastic happened. And that is that a river was given rights. How did that happen? This is a river. It is not a small river. It's a river that has 416 miles. Compare that to River Ouse here. That is a massive river. And the ecosystems, you can imagine, are extremely complex. This is where it is located. We can see Colombia, and we can see Panama is again in the Chocó area, and that is, as Mika mentioned, it is a very, very rich area in biodiversity. You can see there how the river runs. You can see Quibdó at the very bottom. Quibdó was a port in the past was used for slave trade. And all the area has been heavily populated by former slaves, really, who live around along the river. And there are other communities, other indigenous communities living along the river. But what is important from this is that the river is the way of transportation. The river is where the communities eat from, because the diet is, for example, heavily relying on fish. And the river is also where they get water for consumption and also for amenities. So there is no other way to get water other than rainwater. So this is quite crucial. Oh, sorry. let me leave you in that image. And so what happened then with this river? There are two main contaminating issues there. One is illegal logging, so a lot of forest being cut down. And more crucially, mining. Mining also gold, and this has been taken up by illegal mining that use heavy machinery. And it has destroyed completely a lot of areas along the river. And most importantly, it has polluted the river with heavy metal contamination. One of that is mercury. So in the process of providing advice to Lewes and in particular focusing on the methods that have followed, how to revert the situation of contamination in the river, I watched a documentary that showed the extent of contamination on the populations there. And it works this way. The metal contamination is in the river. The fish that live in the river are eaten by the population, and then mercury ends up in the bloodstream and in the system of everybody. The effects are atrocious, to be honest. And people are living with this. Now, this is an area that was also affected by the war, by the civil war. And I'm giving you all these examples and all this data to show you how dramatic and extreme the problems that they were facing, in fact, are. So what was the solution? They went to court, and they asked the court to deliver a remedy. Who did they sue? They sued the state. The claim was not brought on behalf of the river. The claim was brought on behalf of a number of communities along the Atrato. But this was pleaded in a way that eventually the court delivered a very interesting judgment, which is about 350 pages. And in that judgment, the court granted the river rights, including procedural rights, something that even Los Cedros doesn't have, because in the Ecuadorian constitution, there are no procedural rights. They are just substantive rights for nature. And it ordered a number of mechanisms. So I want to just mention the most important ones and compare them to our system here, and in particular to focus on the river use and how can this be used in the example of the protection of the river use. So the first element of this judgment, judgment 422, is the protection of the environment and biodiversity as a superior interest. This is something that the court held. And why? The court basically recognized that the protection of the environment and biodiversity is a priority. And it represented the highest interest based on the international law binding on Colombia. And here I want to make the point that similar international law binds on the UK. Now, one of these international law elements that was pointed out has to do with the Rio Declaration, which is soft law but includes already a lot of customary international law principles which are binding. And customary international law principles are also law of the land in England. Now, Chapter 18 of Agenda 21 in international law, which is a way of implementing some of these principles in the Rio Declaration 1992, provides the following. Water is needed in all aspects of life. The general objective is to make certain that adequate supplies of water of good quality are maintained for the entire population of this planet, while preserving the hydrological, biological, and chemical functions of ecosystems, adapting human activities within the capacity limits of nature. And I want to pause here because this is a crucial holding and a crucial acknowledgement that we can learn from to apply that to the River Ouse. Because from my own examination of the problems that the River Ouse has, is that it's been an over-exploitation of the hydrological sources. So the the water that is underneath and that feeds the river is being taken away in a disproportionate manner to the point that in the future it may kill the river in order to provide drinking water for more and more and more housing. So where is the balance? And what is international law telling us? That we do have standards and that there is balances to be made, and that these balances are actually based on principles that are binding on the United Kingdom. Let me move on to a second important element that was highlighted in this judgment, and that is the ecocentric approach. So it was considered that the right to water as part of an essential right to life in dignity of human beings, it considered that it's essential part of the environment and is necessary for the life of the multiple organisms and species that inhabit the planet, and of course for the human communities that develop around it. So it's not just for human beings, it's also for other life forms, the water that is running through a river. And is the river, seen as a central focus of the living of a community that is not just human community, but is also non-human community, that ensures the life and the driving of the whole biosphere in that location. Now, this ecocentric approach is something that you can aspire to, and is the going back to this Earth Declaration that I just read a minute ago. Now, in order to ensure that that ecological approach was upheld, the court ordered that there should be a design plan that should be prepared by representatives of the state and the community, forming a commission of guardians, and they call it the Guardians of the Adur River. And within 3 months, that commission should be formed. That's what the court said. I highlight this because this is the model that can perfectly work with the river use. Obviously, they would need a panel of experts, and Mika already talked about what the science can do. In the case of the Adur River, the court ordered an advisory panel, which would be comprised by people that had already knowledge about the ecology of that particular river. And it gave a term of 1 year for the Commission of Guardians to design a plan to determine in what way the river could be restored. Now, there was also an additional element that we should pay attention here, which was the biocultural approach. But biocultural, the court meant that we are not only centering on biological issues, but we are also centering on cultural aspects. That is the importance that the human community may find in the connection it has with nature. Now, this worked well for indigenous peoples, but what about non-indigenous peoples or a community that is living in an industrialized environment? And I have attended meetings by the community here, and I have been quite touched by seeing the deep connection that different individuals have expressed. It is something real, and it's something in England has been even reflected in poems, in books, and one of your national anthems, even some of the lines were drafted, inspired by the landscape in the South Downs. in deep connection with the topography and the river. So my submission, I guess, is that this is the very concept of Englishness, which William Blake represented in his famous line when he said, "England's green and pleasant land." So it's deeply embedded in the culture of the English people, and yet this is what is being destroyed, and it is really sad to see that happening. Now, there were 4 rights that were given to the river, and one of them was to be restored. But before moving to that, just finishing with the mechanism, I guess in the case of the River Ouse, while you can, over there in the example of Atrato, there were 14 guardians that were appointed to work together with the government. As I mentioned, it was a very long river. In the case of the River Ouse, I think a very sensible way can be to have representatives based on gender, as it was in the case of Atrato, of the upper, middle, lower, and possibly the River Ouse catchment areas. So there is some representation from these different sections. And the idea will be to form probably a committee to start with as a pilot way of starting discussing possibilities to look at the rights of the river, discuss a possibility to develop in a plan, and then a implementation of that plan. I said that there were 4 rights that were acknowledged to that river, but there is no a specific formula. That all depends on the needs of the river, and I believe that it is based on the ecology of the river. To give you an example, when it comes to the right to flow, certain rivers, and there's one example recently in Canada, where the main thing was the building of dams, and they declared and they gave rights to the river, and the focus was to remove those dams to make sure that the water could flow again. Now, this river hasn't got this problem, right? But there are other issues that are creating a serious threat to the river. You also need indicators, ecological indicators. The sea trout is one of those indicators, and ensuring that the sea trout can thrive in the river use would ensure also the life quality of the river itself. So it is a matter really to work together with a panel of scientists or a panel of advisors from the point of view of the ecology of the river in order to assess and prepare a plan that can actually be implemented in this case. I want to move quickly to the last bit so that I can show you a little short that I prepared for you, and that is participation. None of this can happen without participation, and that's why it's important that the communities are involved and say what they want. The guardianship system in the Atrato worked because of the community participation. They woke up and they realized that to drive as a community, it was enough to focus on the driving of the river, and that automatically was going to secure that they had the right environment around so that they could look for the next generations to live in harmony and to live happy in the same place. And I believe that method can be replicated here in the UK. I believe that there is room within local authorities' powers to be able to make certain things happen. Certainly the formation of a committee within the local council can be the start. And I believe that that doesn't entrench on other obligations that central government may have. But it is a beginning to put the focus on the need to ensure the life of the river and to grant it rights. It's a very strategic and effective way of doing so. With that, I finish with my part of the intervention. I'd like to perhaps show you a short film that can show you the river and the community saying some things, and maybe you want to take away the thoughts with you. Thank you.
La historia de un río lleno de vida y de historias. Una cosa es el oro, otra la mina y otra el minero. En territorio nuestro somos indígenas, afros y campesinos, trabajando sol a sol entre selva y río. Ahora nos dicen que no somos dueños del aire, del territorio y mucho menos de la mina. Antes eran nuestras manos acariciando la orilla, sacando estrellas del río. Ahora máquinas dañan la tierra, qué dolor. Antes era selva verde, horizonte que se pierde. Ahora cortamos el árbol más antiguo para que pase el desarrollo y comprar lo que antes sembrábamos en los patios de nuestra casa donde jugaba cuando era niña. Ay. ¿Cuáles son los datos de los peces muertos? Árboles talados, los muertos enterrados, comunidades que pierden la relación con su río y a cambio someten su propio destino. Aquí llegan todos, diagnostican daños, pero ¿cuántos con nosotros han llegado a sembrar el árbol que fue asesinado? A recuperar el río, a garantizar el oxígeno de los peces envenenados. Mientras canta el agua en su voz, la madre tierra escucha el clamor de mi canción. Una oración que se extiende por entre las montañas hasta llegar a la selva, al valle, al mar.
Oye, escucha. Río, fuente de vida, con tu sol la salud del día, donde ya no se pesca por culpa de la minería. Hemos sido desechados, la historia nos olvida, rescatemos el legado. Por culpa de máquinas pesadas, muchas familias hambre han pasado, están dañando la tierra, dejándola contaminada. Pescadores buscan y no encuentran nada. Levántate, pueblo, saca tu bandera, que el mundo vea lo valioso de tu tierra.
Antes eran nuestras manos acariciando la orilla, sacando estrellas del río. Ahora máquinas dañan la tierra, qué dolor. Antes era selva verde, horizonte que se pierde. Ahora cortamos el árbol más antiguo para que pase el desarrollo. Comprar lo que antes sembrábamos en los patios de nuestra casa donde jugaba cuando era niña.
So our last talk this morning, before we have a break, is called Responsibility and Representation, the Rights of Nature in the UK. And delivering that talk will be Neil Williams, who is a senior lecturer in ethics and environmental philosophy at Roehampton University. He is a moral philosopher specialising in American pragmatism, post-Kantian idealism and environmental thought. The historical and applied strands of his research are unified by an interest in the ways that the effective dimensions of our experience shape our beliefs and practices. His current research projects are the interdisciplinary investigations into the rights of nature. He is interested in working with other academics and external stakeholders to explore how we understand the rights of nature and how these rights are legitimately represented. The interdisciplinary network, of which we have quite a few groups and organisations present here today, and we're also part of a growing UK network, so perhaps you might want to join us. I'd love to welcome to the stage Neil. Hands together, please.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Hey. So yeah, I'm going to try and keep to my 20 minutes starting now. Hi, so I'm here to talk about the rights of nature in the UK. I think these talks have been arranged really well. We've seen some of the ways that the rights of nature movement's happening globally, and now we'll come down to the UK, and then we'll hear more about what's happening right here in Lewes and with the River Ouse. So I'm going to give a little introduction of myself and the team I work with. As a interdisciplinary philosopher, I'd also like to say a little bit about what I think rights of nature means in a moral as well as a legal way. And then I'll give you an overview about what's happening in the UK a little bit. Okay, so I'm part of an interdisciplinary team, as Tasha said. Some of us are here in the audience today. I'm the philosopher on the team. I work with lawyers and ecologists and anthropologists and geographers. We've been a part of a number of projects. Our first one was a scoping survey, trying to find out what's going on in the rights of nature and looking at it from an interdisciplinary angle. We went off to New Zealand after that to try and find out a little bit about what's happening there. And then we came back to the UK, and since summer we've been trying to understand a little bit more about what's happening in the UK. And that's our current project, really, understanding what's happening in the UK and helping, hopefully, to build a network between the initiatives that are about in the UK, because there are quite a few of them, and bringing them together and helping them support each other and communicate with each other is important. There's a website there if you want to visit it, but don't feel obligated. Cool. So I'm going to skip through this bit relatively quickly because you've had two really inspirational and interesting talks so far about what the rights of nature are. They're, a new approach to environmental legislation, environmental thought, environmental activism. We see it emerging across the world. Sometimes it's about giving nature as a whole rights. Sometimes it's about giving specific rivers, forests, mountains rights. Prominent cases across the world, but as we'll see, this is also emerging in the UK. Again, I'm not going to go through these because you've had two very good talks about the global movement, but I think it's useful to see some of these cases across the world just emerging. So the classic cases are Ecuador, New Zealand, Bolivia. This is emerging more and more. We've got Mar Menor Lagoon in Spain, which is, I think, is the first case in Europe. That was a lagoon that was given legal personhood. We've got cases across the world emerging rapidly. In fact, this is probably out of date now. In 2021, there were 178 legal provisions and 35 pending legal provisions across the world in 27 countries. Here's a slightly more up-to-date account. So this is a nice website I was pointed to the other day, the Eco-Jurisprudence Monitor, which suggests that there are about 250 of these cases, maybe more, emerging across the globe. And this is all in the last 10 years, so this is a really kind of emerging movement. It's rapidly happening. So why do people give rights to nature? There's a few, lots of different motivations. I'm pulling out a few from these global movements. One thing that is often emphasized, here's Kirsty Luke, who is the lead Tuhoi negotiator for the Maori tribe in New Zealand. Te Urewera, which is one of the places in New Zealand that has been granted rights, is not property, it's not real estate, it is my mother. Another quote here from the Constitution of Ecuador. Nature has the right to integral respect for its existence and the maintenance and regeneration of its life cycles. And a really nice quote here from the Court of Columbia, which really emphasizes the ecocentric or non-anthropocentric aspect of rights of nature. Human beings are no way the owner of other species. Nature is a true subject of rights, and it is right that these rights are supported by local communities. So in all of these different movements, I think we can identify some common threads. Recognition that nature has intrinsic value, value that is not reducible to the use of human beings. So non-anthropocentric, or as we've heard today, ecocentric. Local communities are important for representing these rights, or indigenous communities. These lead to stronger protections, legal protection for nature, and there's often a rejection that the idea of nature is owned. So, this is me with my philosopher hat on now for 5 minutes. I just want to say something about how we think about rights, because I think we use the word rights a lot, but sometimes we don't stop to think about exactly what it means. And I'd like to emphasize the idea that rights is, when we say that something has rights, or we say that we have rights, what we're talking about is not something that we own individually, but something that is a relationship in a community of equals, right? So to have a right is to have a legitimate claim to some kind of treatment from other people, and that other people have a duty to respect. So if person A, if I say I have a right, that means I have a claim to expect treatment from you, person B, right? And that means that this second person has a duty to person A. So rights are always relational. They're not individual. They're not something that we own. It's always a communication within a community. So if some person has a right, then someone else has a responsibility to live up to that, to respect that right. So it's, yes, to emphasize that, it's a relationship between different parties. And we can see this in the classic example of human rights. Human rights protects legitimate central interests such as my right to life, my right to shelter, my right to freedom, education, and so on. But if I have this right, that means that you all have a responsibility to make sure that I can exercise those freedoms, right? So if I have a legitimate claim to not be killed, well, good news, that means that you all have a responsibility not to kill me, right? So this is the case with legal and moral rights. I think sometimes we confuse them. Of course, even if, for whatever reason, the UK government didn't recognise my legal rights to life, we'd still have moral rights to life. These are things that we think that human beings owe to each other just by virtue of being human beings. And luckily, these are also enshrined and instantiated in law as legal rights. So, how does this move on to the rights of nature? Well, again, we might say that nature has some fundamental interest. There are fundamental interests of rivers, forests, to have health, stability, biodiversity, freedom from pollution, and so on. If we think that a river has these kinds of rights, well, the same diagram applies. That means that we, or a group or a society, has a responsibility to not to pollute those rivers. So if a river has a right not to be polluted, we have a responsibility to live up to that right. So I think the importance of seeing rights as relational in this way is that it recognizes quite how dramatic and interesting and radical rights of nature is as a movement. Because it's not just treating nature as something to be preserved or something to be protected, it's welcoming nature into our moral and legal community. It's seeing nature as an equal, something that we owe duties to, something that we must treat as a subject into law and a subject in morality too, something that we owe duties to. So nature and the rights of nature is included in our moral and legal community, and that's one of the reasons why it's so exciting and innovative. Now, there's a second component to rights of nature that needs to be emphasized, because of course, although we have the River Ouse here with us in some extent, the River Ouse can't defend itself, right? It can't go into a court of law. So it needs to be represented. These rights need to be represented by legitimate representatives. And this is where the relationship that these ecosystems, that nature has with local communities, indigenous communities across the world, is recognized. Because we see that those local communities, those indigenous peoples, are best placed to represent those rights. So the Rights of Nature initiatives, as well as giving rights to previously vulnerable ecosystems, they also recognise that previously disenfranchised communities should be empowered to represent those rights and to act in the interests of these ecosystems. So Rights of Nature then embodies the idea that the health and empowerment of local communities and the health and empowerment of ecosystems are intimately connected. So we've seen some examples already of these representative systems. New representative institutions are being introduced across the world. Sometimes these are new guardianship institutions, such as the case in New Zealand. Sometimes any citizen within that community can bring legal action for the sake of nature. That's the case in Ecuador. Sometimes, more rarely, existing institutions are given new powers to support the new rights of nature. And again, I think one of the things we can talk about today is, well, which of these representative structures, or possibly a new representative structure, is most suitable here. But yes, to summarise what I've said so far then, Rights of Nature has two components as I see it. It's a recognition that something natural, an ecosystem or nature as a whole has an inherent right, or we have responsibilities to respect that right, but also the idea that local communities should be empowered to respect and represent those rights. Okay, so on to some of the stuff that's happening in the UK. So I should mention that when we came back from New Zealand, this is our current project, but this by no means indicates all of the initiatives happening in the UK. These are just the ones that I happen to be aware of. If you are aware of any initiatives that I'm not speaking about, please come and tell me, because there are lots of them, I think, and I'm learning about more of them every day. So of course, we're all here to talk about the River Ouse motion. So I'm not going to say more about that, because you'll hear more about that in just a second. Obviously, this aims to give the local community some kind of control over the management of your own river. This is about passing a motion in the council. Yes, more on this later. We've got declarations in the River Cam from the Friends of the River Cam are leading this. So this takes place every year, where the rights of the River Cam is read as a kind of a public event, an annual event. It's almost like a ritual. They've really kind of, they do songs and speeches and so on. It's something that brings the community together. The rights of the River Cam were framed around the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Rivers. And they're also, again, following the good example set by Lewes and the River Ouse, filing a petition and hopefully finding some support from the council there to pass a motion. In the River Dart, and we have representatives here today from the River Dart, they have created a River Dart Charter at Dartington. It's a statement of shared values, giving communities a voice. This is run by both Dartington Trust and the Bioregional Learning Centre. The local community is identified as stewards of the water to uphold the rights and responsibilities of the river. This is a moral charter. They are not yet, anyway, trying to follow a legal pathway, but they aim to extend the charter throughout the length of the River Dart, and that's the next stage of that project. The River Don project up in Sheffield, led by an organisation called Opus. They're engaging with a lot of different ideas. One of the things that they're doing is developing a new online engagement platform. This blows my mind, and I don't really understand the ins and outs of it, but I think the idea is they gather a lot of information from the communities. There's some kind of online platform that gathers this together, and then eventually there'll be some online platform where citizens can interact with the river in some meaningful sense. So this is a really innovative approach, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But it is about raising awareness, about increasing local communities' understanding of their relationship with the river, and rethinking that relationship in a way that is less anthropocentric. But they are also exploring the possibility of a legal approach of recognising the River Don as a legal person. So here's some others. I'm not going to go through all of these in details. A lot of these places are also filing council motions. I was reminded this morning by my colleague, Jeremy, who's sitting in the audience, so you can ask him for more information, that this is also happening in Northern Ireland. There's similar council motions happening there. There are events that have taken place, I'm aware of, in River Avon and River Exe. These are exciting events, again, to bring the community together around this notion of the rights of nature and explore new rituals, new practices, new ideas of changing the relationship that human beings have with their local environment. Or we might say returning to a better relationship with our environment. And we also, there's a blossoming community charters movement happening across the UK, which often recognise the rights of nature along with other community rights. And there are examples in Falkirk, St Ives and Brydale, but plenty of others across the UK. Not specifically about rights of nature, but often including a statement about the rights of nature within the community charters. A couple more really exciting examples. So this has happened in the last year. Faith in Nature is a UK company who is, well, I thought first in the world, but actually I was told yesterday that this might not be the case. There might have been a previous example. But certainly a very exciting development, appointed nature onto its board of directors. So that means that this company has appointed a representative, someone independent of the company and who is empowered to vote on behalf of nature in the interests of nature as a whole. The company is committed to transparency, so this isn't just a greenwashing attempt. The idea is that if the board, for whatever reason, goes against the advice of the representative of nature, they have to publish something that says, well, why they decided to go against that advice. So in designing this new addition to the board, they worked with legal experts, most notably Lawyers for Nature and the Earth Law Centre. And I believe Lawyers for Nature is still the representative. Yes, that's correct. And indeed, Bronte is in the audience here today, so if you want to talk to her about this, please do. This is, as of last week or the week before, happened for a second time for a company in the UK. So this is the House of Hackney, who again appointed a representative onto the board. Here it is a representative who votes in the interests of both Mother Nature and future generations. So slightly different model, but still we can see this as a rights of nature example. Again, working with Lawyers for Nature, who again are a representative in that case. So yeah, these are innovative new ways of talking about the rights of nature. Again, you see those components, acting for the sake of nature, not treating it as a resource, and finding legitimate representation for those rights. And there's also the development, is currently being led by the Green Party, but looking for cross-party support to develop a UK-wide bill on the rights of nature. The draft was presented last month, focused on the idea that the rights of nature are inherent and intimately connected with human rights. We can't have human rights without nature having rights, is the idea. So aiming for a big paradigm shift in the way that we think about our own rights as well as the rights of nature. And aims to empower and support local initiatives like exactly what's happening here in Lewes. And later on in the development, they'll be inviting stakeholder groups like yourself to contribute to that UK-wide bill if it goes ahead. So there you go. That's just some of the things happening in the UK. So you can see that we have lots of different movements in the rights of nature happening in slightly different levels, happening in different ways. And you'll see this as across the globe. Rights of nature is a really interesting movement because there is no one way of achieving it. But as I say, I think there are those two elements that are always present. Recognition that nature has intrinsic value, should be acted upon or protected for its own sake, not just for ours, and the idea that we must empower legitimate representatives, most usually local communities. And yeah, so that means that you guys here in this room are leading the charge on something that is happening across the UK. And I think a lot of these initiatives are looking to you, looking to take inspiration from what's happening in Lewes. And yeah, I hope you guys realise what an opportunity this is and what an exciting thing this is in the history of the UK. Good. Well, I think we'll cover most of this in the panel discussion. So I'm just going to mention this now before ending. One question that keeps getting asked is why rights of nature when we already have existing legislation? I think there's lots of different reasons. One is that it empowers local communities, as I've said. One is that it changes the way that we view nature or the value of nature from a transactional approach to one where we see nature as an equal. We might get better legal protections. But also I think it's flexible, and this is something that as a moral philosopher I'm interested in. When we change the vocabulary about the way that we talk about nature, we change the way we see nature, we change the whole conversation, right? So by talking about the rights of nature, by talking about nature as something that is a subject of rights instead of just a resource, even if we do the same things to protect it, we've completely changed the dynamic of our relationship and the ways that we talk about these things. The buzzing on my wrist tells me my 20 minutes is up. So there's my contact details if you want to get in contact. But as I said, many of the representatives of these initiatives are here in the audience. So please also chat to them if you're interested in any more of these initiatives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Neil. There's so much happening in this country. We sort of had no idea that there was quite so many things going on, so it's been really amazing learning journey to know that Lewes is part of a whole community within this country. Anyway, I think we all need a break, and as lovely Josh here, who I know is here today, he's got a good phrase. Let's go get some ooze out and then some ooze in for 15 minutes. So 15-minute break and then make your way back in. Thank you very much. Right, welcome back. Sorry, that was a very brief break. You will have a bit more chance to talk later, I promise. So welcome back to our second session of the day. So we have one more talk and then we'll have a panel discussion. So we've gone from our global to national, and now we're going to go very much to local with the River Ouse. So our next talk is called Rights for the Sussex Ouse, the Story So Far. And our speaker is Matthew Bird. So Matthew is a chartered environmentalist, climate and sustainability professional with a background at local authorities. He's a Lewes Town Councillor and the current Lewes Mayor. Matthew is a climate lead for Sussex Wildlife Trust and works for a number of local organisations, including the community-owned renewable energy company Avesco and Get Bikery, an e-cargo bike scheme for the town. Matthew was the proposer for the Lewes District Council Rights of River motion, which was passed in February when he was the Cabinet Member for Sustainability. He is also a director at Love Our Ouse. Please put your hands together for Matthew.
Thank you very much, and it's so exciting to see so many of you here today. It's been quite a journey, and in some ways it's a journey that started here in Depot Cinema. I can't remember exactly when, probably last year at some point, no, maybe 2 years ago. 2 Novembers ago, when we saw a film, Invisible Hand. If nobody's seen it, I'd really recommend it. So it was about a community in the US that faced a fracking company, and the local lake faced real pollution issues. And despite there being legislation, despite the Environmental Protection Agency, they just felt that nobody was really speaking up for them. So we had quite an amazing talk afterwards with Paul Powersland, who I think is here today. No, he's not. Couldn't make it. But that sort of really started that conversation, started the seed that then led to Love Our Ouse forming and the Rights of River motion. So just a little bit about us. We're four directors. Duncan sitting over there, who has a background in sort of agriculture and sustainability. Emma Montlake, who has a background in environmental protection through the Environmental Law Foundation. Tasha, who is the sustainability manager here at the depot, and carrier of the ouse to all events, gatherer of the ouse and carrier of the ouse, and myself. And then we have others that have joined us along the way. So we have Sandra, who is working on our sort of citizen science activities, and has a sort of long background in working on the Adur catchment partnership. And also Josh Levine as well, who has a background in sort of participatory engagement, and I think worked on the River Dart project as well, and has worked on with communities on many rivers around the world. So we've been sort of gathering in people along the way. So it's really, really, really exciting. And basically, we ended up putting on this River Festival event last year, which then that brought together quite a lot of people into our workshops, and one of the workshops was based on Rights of Rivers. So that's sort of where the focus started from. But before I sort of get on to where we are in our journey with rights of rivers, of the River Ouse, just wanted to give you a little bit of history about the river. It's 36 miles from the furthest point to the sea at Newhaven, and I suppose in some ways it's quite mysterious because nobody really knows exactly where the source is, but it's the furthest point, somewhere near Slaffham in West Sussex. And the river really changes in character along the way. So it's very rural, very windy in the upper reaches, and then it has those urban areas, you know, when where it goes through Lewes and through Newhaven, and it's tidal in the lower reaches as well. So it's a river of different characters, and that's what makes it so special. But it has also been sort of heavily modified in the past. You know, in the 1790s, there was the Lower Ouse Navigation Act that I think was brought in mainly because of the flooding that used to occur because of silting up of the mouth with shingle. And so that they created a new cut to Newhaven and created quite a few different cuts along the river, which ended up with it being quite straightened and almost canal-like. And then in the Upper Ouse, there were lots of locks put in because more traffic started to occur. You know, I think there were 19 locks. And quite a lot of river traffic. In fact, the Balkan Viaduct, which has 11 million bricks for those brick nerds, most of those bricks sort of came up from Piddinghoe, some from the Netherlands, but quite a lot from Piddinghoe, and they were taken by horse-drawn barges to the viaduct, and creating the railway that essentially sort of got rid of the need for any locks for any rivers. So it kind of created its own demise in a way. And I think the other thing that I just wanted to highlight was that, you know, on the Upper Ouse, it's very hard to actually get to the river. There's not much access. It's privately owned, whereas, you know, the lower reaches, there's much more sort of access. And this picture just gives quite a good sort of stark image of the changes that can happen in 100 years. So the postcard on the left is from 1923, and the photo on the right was taken from the same position in this year, in 2023. And you can see there, I don't know, will this work? Can I use a laser pointer? Which one was the laser pointer? Is it the middle one? Oh, I can't see. Anyway, but it's the last one. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. Behind those gas cylinders there, you can just about make out where the course of the original river. That bit at the front was one of the cuts that was made. So the river was really straightened at that point. And it just shows how, how industrial the parts of the river were there. I mean, there were paper mills along the length of the river, but, as the Industrial Revolution sort of kicked in and industry worked up, then people's relationship with the river, changed quite a lot. And you can really see that in these 4 photos and images. So the first one shows, I think it was around about the 1790s. And that was the original bridge there across at Lewes. And it shows that, there's a lot of use of the river and there's a lot of fishing, but you can see on the one on the right that it's much more windy going through the town. That's a view from South Street. And there was a lot more interaction with the river, and sort of more fishing, more crossing of the river. So the people were in constant contact that I think probably started to disappear quite a lot in the Industrial Revolution. So you can see here on this photo, which is a view from the bridge, the industries that have spread along the banks and essentially blocked off the river. So it was also sort of very polluted at that point by tanneries and metalworks. And even into the 70s, into that last picture, that you will actually see that view from the railway land. But on the right there, which is the sort of Kuhfell tunnel, where the tunnel is, and that's before the tunnel, there was a cement works there, even into the 1970s. And that's probably when the last commercial traffic sort of stopped along the river. And I think at that point, and it's been mentioned a few times, I think it's almost like people turned their back on the river. And in Lewes, it was just seen as, it was there, it was a bit dirty. It's, when the tide is low, it's very muddy and sludgy. And I think it's only sort of really recently that those connections and engagement with the river has sort of started to become more widespread. And these are some of our residents of the Ouse. And we have some fantastic wildlife in the Ouse. Anyone that's ever witnessed the mullet murmurations, it's a very special event. At the railway land, it's really exciting to see them when they're gathering, and it's very, very mysterious. We have kingfishers, the sea trout, and as I understand it, we have the biggest species of sea trout. And I think I've been told by one of our angler friends who might be here today that one of the reasons for that probably is the feeding that they can do around the chalk cliffs, and some really good feeding. So we have very special sea trout, and as Monica has said, a really good indicator of the health of the river. My favourite, lamprey, because they're just so weird. They have 150 teeth. And they smell blood. This is how they move. They're like the vampires, and they I think they can't swim. I don't know if that's right. I think they just sort of move along. And also, almost as mysterious, the eel. And I remember being told by I can't remember his name, but the guy that runs Harvey's, I should know. But he said that he used to fish off the bridge for eel, at Lewes, as a boy, and then they used to sort of sell them locally to shops. And there's been such a sort of decline in the amount of eel. We have damselflies and the little egrets, the Egret's Way, which is a pathway connecting Lewes and Newhaven that's being worked on. You see the egrets there all the time, so very special. So we have many, many more residents, but those are just some key ones that I wanted to focus on. And at the same time, we have massive threats to our river. Climate change is a big one. We have droughts, so when it dries out in the summer, and essentially with climate change, we're going to have hotter, drier summers, warmer, wetter winters, more intense, frequent storms. And we've seen, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, that it's absolutely bang on with the projections around those severe weather events. And we've seen a lot of damage to the banks. And I cycle along the river quite a lot, and in danger of their chasms, some of them in the summer. And that, has massive ramifications for the health of riverbanks. And we have threats from flooding as well. And that photo on the far right there shows the flood of 2000 and the contamination that then occurs with oil and sewage and all sorts of things. And in the middle, that's a slurry incident that I think happened on the Plumpton Mill stream. Killed quite a few fish. And a similar climate event, bottom right there, which is on the Glynde stream, Glymisfit, which killed several 100,000 fish, and that was because there was a lot of deoxygenation of the river. It had been a very hot summer, and then there was a storm. And essentially, we're not, in terms of resilience, we're not really thinking about the river and how it's going to be impacted by climate change. And there have been some really positive things happening in the last few years. There's been a lot of work with Sussex Wildlife Trust and with the Usinadas Rivers Trust that is looking at natural flood management, for instance. And there's been some great work done with the cockshoot, so in terms of sort of restoring the wiggle and looking at turning it into becoming a wetlands. And so I think there's a lot of work going on in terms of natural flood management, but there are still other climate threats that we're facing that we really need to understand a lot better. And then we have threats from litter, and we also have threats especially from sewage. And I suppose this was where, for us, Rights of Rivers sort of really, really started. Before, just go back, because just to say, before we brought the motion to council on Rights of Rivers, we had two previous motions on water pollution. One I brought, which was focused mainly on Southern Water and looked at the number of spills that had happened, the number of incidents, and then one that was brought by my colleague, Councillor O'Brien, Emily O'Brien, who's here today, which was focused on the development and basically that the current water infrastructure is just not up to to dealing with the amount of development that there is and the amount of development online. And I really felt that we went in these cycles of outrage. This is what we're saying as a council. Then a response from Southern Water saying, yeah, we're going to do better. And so it felt like a little bit of a sort of a Groundhog Day to some extent, but also at the same time it felt like quite a narrow focus and a very negative focus, that the river was just seen as this place that was suffering from pollution. And I felt like it was, and I think we all felt to some degree, that it did a disservice to the river, that the river is much, much more than that. And so the Rights of Rivers motion was kind of came out of that spirit, and the fact that it felt like it could disrupt this cycle, and it could disrupt this conversation and come up with a more positive view. And it really reminded me, coming from a background of sustainability and Agenda 21, it was mentioned by Monica. In the early days, after the Rio Earth Summit, councils took that call on to enact local Agenda 21 strategies, which was, looking at sustainability and how that might be applied in local contexts. And at the time, it felt like a sort of fairly vague, big, overarching thing. How does that happen in practice? And now, sustainability is just in the mainstream. We recognise it as defining all sorts of actions. Lots of things that are done at local authority level are done through a sustainability lens. There are lots of things that aren't, but it's really understood. And I feel that that's where we are a little bit with the Rights of Rivers motion. So basically, the important thing to get from that is that we got 2 years to come up with a charter that for possible endorsement by the council. And I have to say the discussion that took place during that motion was really eye-opener, and it was kind of like this journey of, well, that's crazy, to, oh, this is interesting, to, yeah, I get this. And we had a really passionate speech from a Conservative opposition member who just got it. And that just for me showed that in a very short space of time, people can understand the spirit and come round. And I'm very aware that we've spoken about the Universal Declaration, but we haven't shown you what it is. So, that is the Universal Declaration of Rights of Rivers as it stands. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it a lot more throughout the day. So after the motion was passed, it just went boom. And we were contacted by lots of journalists. So there were lots of articles published, podcasts, interviews. We've helped 5 students with their masters. We talked to other river groups. We gave a talk at the River Trust conference, and spoken to other local authorities and other wildlife trusts. It's really important to say that the motion was supported by Ouse Rivers Trust and Sussex Wildlife Trust, and there are other wildlife trusts working on this as well. So it was just going from a point of thinking, well, this is something that we're just doing locally, we realised that actually, no, this is happening everywhere. And as Neil said, it's happening in lots of different ways. And that's the exciting thing about it, is that there is no one size fits all. It's a bit of a journey for different communities. So to get to the summit, there is a timeline, the last half of which seems to have missed off. But we have to February 2025 to come up with a charter. And it's important to say that this is a Lewes District Council motion. So we're supporting the District Council on this. And to that end, there is a steering group that we have made up of the council, Lewes District Council, Love Our Ouse, Railway Land Trust, Sussex Wildlife Trust, and Ouse and Adur Rivers Trust. So we meet occasionally to discuss this. And we also just recognise the power of Rights of Rivers as an engagement tool. So we've spoken to lots of different groups, young people, especially really get it and have come up with brand new rights, including the right for the River Ouse to marry other rivers, which I think is a great one. And one of the things that we've used this community mapping tool, which is this massive River Ouse. So we've got all these different A0 sections of the River Ouse that have just elicited fantastic comments from people, and some of them are very spiritual, just about, you know, this is where I find myself, and others are sort of really specific about sort of points of pollution, and that's enabled us to sort of gather a really good sort of holistic feedback from people on how, you know, on information which kind of sits under those rights. So it's giving us this evidence base that's really exciting. And we're really aware that there is so much work to do, and we're just at the beginning. We do not have the answers, but we're exploring what possible solutions might be. We need to talk more to landowners. We have the Wheeled Waves network, which is doing amazing work in sort of, you know, connecting with bigger landowners and thinking about the river as a whole, and some of those issues around restoration and nature recovery and how they might link with rights of rivers. But there's lots of landowners that it would be good to engage with. District Council is a landowner as well. We're very aware that, you know, we haven't had conversations with Mid Sussex District Council. We did have an event in Borkham a couple of months ago, or a month ago, and we had some brilliant feedback from people there. But there's a lot more work to do, and there is a lot of work going on with the legal mechanisms, as we've spoken about. We're very lucky to have some expert advice and support, and mentioned the pro bono support from Monica, and looking at how we link with existing legislation. I mean, I think the key thing is that if our rivers were in a good state, then they wouldn't need anything else if the legislation was working, but it isn't. We don't know what the chances of national progress are. You know, maybe tomorrow the government might wake up and say, yeah, rights for rivers. Probably not. So, but they didn't do that with sustainability either. You know, it was a very much a sort of bottom-up approach as well. So, and now that has become sort of, you know, it's enshrined in top-down legislation. So there's a lot of work to do, and a lot of this we'll be exploring through the workshops this afternoon. So I won't mention any more about that. And then just lastly, a little bit of an advertisement for the Rights of Rivers People Tour. We've got 3 more events. The next one's coming up in Barkham, then there's Lewes and Newhaven. And again, we will be engaging with people on rights of rivers, but also around sort of community mapping, you know, and other issues to do with the Ouse. And lastly, I just wanted to point out our Love Our Ouse patch that was made for if anybody knows the Coat of Hopes, that sort of walked all the way from Newhaven to Glasgow as part of COP26. It's really exciting to have a Love Our Ouse patch on there and the river represented on the Coat of Hopes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So now we've got a little bit of a shuffle. We've got a very exciting panel discussion. So would those who are sitting on the panel like to come to the stage? And I'm going to have a little rest and hand over to Henri Brocklebank from the Sussex Wildlife Trust, who's going to be hosting the panel discussion. So please give everybody a warm welcome.
Any particular order? So thank you very much, Tash, and thank you very much for the honour of chairing this quite large panel. So what we're going to do first is introduce each of the panel members, some of whom you'll know as speakers already. But first of all, I want to thank the Love Our Ouse group for bringing this incredible event together and the inspiring speakers, and also for Lewes District Council for getting us this far. It's so exciting, and I think everybody probably feels the same after today's presentations. So now's the chance to ask questions. We've got a few questions that have been sent in advance, and then we'll kind of be open to the floor for people to ask questions, so start thinking what your questions might be. But first of all, just a couple of sentences each from each of you on who you are and what. Tell us a bit about why you're here.
Hello, I'm Ben Taylor. I manage the Iford Estate, which runs in Ouse terms from just the other side of the bypass down towards Robmell, and we look after about 1,800 metres or 2,000 metres of the river bank and running all the way up to the village of Iford. We're farmers, but we're also becoming environmentalists as we look at biodiversity net gain as a means to deliver what has become an 800 hectare habitat restoration vision, including a big chunk of the Lewes Brooks.
Hi, I'm Peter King. I'm the director of the Ouse and Adur Rivers Trust, and I also chair the Adur and Ouse Catchment Partnership. So I've been working on this river for about 13 years. I've personally surveyed about 300 kilometres of it, and as an organisation we run multiple citizen science projects that collect data on a lot of the things that have been discussed, so water quality, environmental health, sea trout populations, etc. And through the Catchment Partnership are working on a climate vulnerability and adaptation strategy for the catchment as well.
I don't think I need to say who I am.
Thanks, thank you. Lovely to be here. My name's Emily O'Brien. So I'm one of the Lewes District Councillors. So my ward is Ouse Valley and Ringmer. So I have a very personal interest in the Ouse. I'm a Green Party councillor. So Lewes District Council is a Green-led council, is increasing number. We're in alliance with the Labour Party. And my role in that is part of the executive, so I'm the cabinet member with responsibility for climate, nature and food, so Rights of Rivers comes under me. I should just give a quick intro to Lewes District Council as well. Like other district councils, we're small, and district councils have very limited powers. The UK is the most centralised country in Europe when it comes to local government. So central government doesn't let us set our own taxes, doesn't even let us set our own rent on our council houses at the moment. So we're very small, but we're also very plucky. We're a small but plucky council. So whilst our responsibilities are largely around things like housing, planning and collecting your bins, and things like your council tax, we also have really ambitious climate and nature plans, and a real commitment to the rights of rivers. We also do our own nature restoration projects. As Matthew said, we own land and we are actively using that land to restore our rivers. And we also have in the audience today some of our fantastic council officers who are also, 100% committed to seeing how our very small but very plucky local council can help change the conversation, and we hope our local conversation will then help to shift the dial nationally.
Hello, that's working. Hi, my name is Emma Montlake. I am from the Environmental Law Foundation, but also love our Ouse. Been working around wild law, as we used to call it, back in the old days, which is now translated into rights of nature for some decades. But very excited to be part of this initiative with Love Our Ouse and my fellow directors, and also working with the council and other interested support stakeholders. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Hi again, you don't need an introduction from me. I'm Neil, I'm an academic working in ethics and environmental philosophy, and I've been looking at the rights of nature for a couple of years, interested in the moral and conceptual foundations of it.
Yes, my name again, Monica Feria-Tinta. I'm a barrister at 20 Essex, and I've been advising on on the rights of the River Ouse. Not alone, some colleagues of mine are present here from Hogan Lovells, with whom I'm also working. We are working together. Emily, Steve. So we are a team that is trying to support and do the best professional way of implementing these brilliant ideas that this community has.
Right, thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, that is working. So, our first question was actually answered so beautifully during the presentations today, which was, why do we need rights of rivers when we have environmental legislation? Now, Neil's actual last slide was asking exactly that question, so I don't really think we need to repeat that because it's been such a feature of the event so far. So we're going to dive in at our second question. Excuse me. Would you like, by all means?
Well, I think this is a crucial question, and what I like to say about that is my practice is quite broad, and one of the latest pieces of advice I delivered was at national level the possibility to actually have a bill, environmental bill, and that made me survey everything that we have in the land on environmental law protections in England. And I can certainly say that the current legal framework is patchy, it is inconsistent, it has a number of inherent defects that in a way explains the current state where we are in. And therefore, Rights of Nature is in a way addressing a empty space. And I think in this particular case in England, very similar to Ireland, we mentioned Ireland before, is from bottom up rather than, you know, from up down. And what is interesting is that in Ireland, that has taken up the discourse all the way to a possible constitutional amendment, which is right now being discussed in Ireland, and it's very likely that, you know, it will build up on a point that we will have a state here, a neighbor, having rights of nature embedded in its constitution. But in England, it seems that in order for such changes to take place, it will have to be the other way around necessarily, and we will discuss far more why. But this is in my own approach is a practical one, and unless I see rights implemented, for me are illusionary. So I'm here to discuss mechanisms.
Thank you so much. Would any of the other panels like? You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, because I think, yes, we know there is environmental legislation, and as I said, but we also know it's not working. And what has been suggested, you know, by government has been in the pipeline for ages. You know, there's a vacuum of policy at the moment, or at least very weak policy. And I think what Rights of Rivers does is it offers a framework. So it offers a sort of way of just balancing lots of those things that we might be, you know, I mentioned there's some great work going on. So there's some great work going on, for instance, around nature restoration. But then there are other gaps. So I think the Charter offers this framework within which we can then balance all of these, all of the threats and all of the opportunities. So, and I think the idea that it is bottom up, and somebody mentioned Thomas Paine, and it's come up before, you know, and I think that's probably why it chimes with a lot of people we talk to, because it is a feeling of, yes, we know actually that there is an injustice being done at the moment to the river, and at least having a charter of some kind offers quite a pragmatic response to that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so our next question is, what are the mechanisms in which landowners can engage with rights of rivers, and what synergies might there be in current government policy? So we have a landowner here. So let me just step back so you're in the light. Would you like to answer that?
So mechanisms in which landowners can engage with rights to the river. Well, I mean, I guess there's a number of existing ways which I don't think function particularly well. You've got the government support schemes which might enable us to do some sort of nature restoration, but it doesn't work well enough, I don't think. But you've got new ones coming down the track, and it's things like biodiversity net gain, which we're involved with, and there's a whole environmental social governance piece coming down the track, and I really hope that actually we can use mechanisms like that to actually get funding in from organisations to enable us to do some proper good to the river and to the land surrounding it.
Monica. Emma?
Yes. I think for Love Our Ouse, once we started digging into potential opportunities, it felt like actually there was a slew of opportunities, certainly at the local level, and then you start to look sort of above that local level, and as Ben has indicated, we have things that are coming down the track through the Environment Act, and we have conservation covenants where we haven't got all the statutory guidance out yet, but we're waiting for them. And something that's been mentioned before is about this use of language, about this use of rights of nature, rights of rivers language, and their potential within conservation covenants for landowners to put aside part of their land and start to get that language in the mix. And indeed, I think, biodiversity net gain also, why doesn't that offer opportunities? So I think it is about this shift in thinking, and once you start to shift your thinking, you start to see opportunities, and this government is really turning its back on the green agenda. That certainly feels like something that's happening. But even so, I think there are potentials there for landowners to really start to look. It's about having imagination and seeing what we have already and where we can push those opportunities.
Thank you, Emma. I think Monica wanted to say something, then Emily.
Yeah, very quickly, building up on what was just said, going back to the word inherent, when I had made my comments before and I spoke about the human rights development, in all the cases, in all the treaties, in all these declarations, there is always been a acceptance that this is not what creates the right. And it's always been said that this is what recognizes an inherent right. And I'm speaking as a practitioner. I have to stand in court and explain courts what does that mean. And I think in the case of rights of nature, it's exactly the same. It's not about creating something new, really. It's about simply acknowledging something inherent, which I have given some evidence that we are quite well aware of and states are quite aware of. So when it comes to landowners, I think is to precisely acknowledge that, try to see things from the perspective of the river. And this can have very tangible implications when it comes to how you relate to your own land. The example of NEC project, I think, is a wonderful one. Well, they rewilded everything. I visited that and I saw that stretch of the river, and I thought it was extremely interesting. So, for example, issues of pollution, issues of whether you control, what type of agricultural issues surrounds the river, whether you are aware, for example, of the impact of pesticides in the river and how this pollutes the river. There are a lot of landowners that take water from the river, and this is uncontrolled, and this goes to this right that I was mentioning before, that the river has the right to actually have its own hydrological sources being able to flow. And then there is also the issue of how obviously you don't contaminate that with sewage that comes sometimes from private sewage. I have only become aware of that now that I live in Surrey. Before living in London, I was unaware all my dirt went to, but only now I'm aware it goes to land and it may end up somewhere else. And I think we sometimes don't reflect much on what dirt we produce and what happens with that. And finally, when my partner knew that I was working on this project, he studied forestry in Vienna. And he looked at the river and he told me how strange the habitats around, the long patches that have no trees or no bushes or nothing. He told me that's unnatural. And it made me think, because basically for the wildlife that we saw in pictures here, there's a number of requirements, even for the fish, to have a little bit of wood or a tree that fell onto the river. That's important, because that creates the opportunities for them to put eggs, and the anglers must know very well about that, which really takes us to the idea of rewilding. So yes, landowners can have an input on all of these, because it's how they manage their land, which can have an impact, a big impact on the life of the river.
Thank you, Monica. Emily.
Thanks. Yeah, just around this sort of landowners question and what's coming out of government at the minute that might help with that engagement. I think one thing that's quite important to have on the table at the moment, which has come out of the Environment Act from 2021, is the local nature recovery strategies, because we are just at the point of developing them now. So there'll be an East Sussex-wide one, and this is something that will happen right across the UK. I think they're going to be a really important tool to allow landowners to engage with these agendas, because I just find it really hard to imagine that anywhere taking a strategic approach to nature recovery, where the aim is about consolidating, building corridors, getting connectivity, really trying to be smart about how we do nature restoration. We already have our rivers as our green-blue corridors. So I think in our area, and I imagine up and down the country, our rivers are going to play a really key role in working out these strategies. And I think the thing that gives me optimism, and I don't always get optimistic about things that come out of government, it has to be said, but the thing that gives me some hope around this is that they will hold some weight within the planning system. So we have very few powers as a local council, as a district council, but we can develop local planning policy, and we are also required to respond to things which have weight in the planning system, and this will be one of those things. So it's not just another kind of designation that gets written and then somehow it gets overwritten if a developer wants to develop land. It will actually hold some weight within the planning system. So I think that's one of the areas which gives me some optimism, and I think it's one of the areas in which landowners will see the benefit of engaging, because it will then unlock some of the funding that there will be for nature restoration.
Thank you, Emily. I think Pete's got a point too.
Very quick, is this working? Hello? No. So I'll just shout. So I think just to... is that better? Yeah. So just to flip it on its head a little bit, I think we as the people that are advocates for rights for rivers and clearly have a very vested interest in seeing very healthy ecosystems, we shouldn't be reliant on landowners engaging with us. We need to actively go and engage with landowners. We have a range of landowners. We deal a lot with landowners, and a lot of them are very small farmers that are trying to eke out livings in relatively low-grade agricultural land, and to expect these guys who are very busy to come and actively participate in this type of thing is not realistic, and we need to be making some very clear messaging around what the expectation is, what the opportunity is, what the benefit, because most of this does benefit in terms of food production. There is huge drive for food production as well that we must balance against this. So I think we must be prepared to go and have difficult conversations with landowners and not expect them just to come to us thinking that everything we're suggesting is a very good idea, which obviously we all do believe it is.
Thank you, Pete. This is a question that keeps on giving. I think Matthew, then Ben.
Oh, you go first. Go on.
No, just that I agree with that. I mean, I think, engagement is always a two-way street.
And I was just going to add that I think actually in general landowners would be very keen to engage with this, but they just need their hands held really and pointed in the right direction. We're all always keen to, I think, in general, to look at things which will help the environment and will help the nature, because it's important for all of us, and particularly for the landowner, because it's integral to our food production systems.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to move us on to the next question. So, if the River Ouse, represented here, has rights, who would be their representative? Let's go straight to Neil.
I was volunteering. I was saying I should be the representative. Yeah. So I mean, I don't have an answer to this question, but it's a really interesting one, and obviously the answer is going to look different in each place that rights of nature occurs. I just wanted to emphasise a couple of points. I think from a philosophical angle, the question is who is a legitimate representative for nature's rights? Because it can't just be anyone. It has to be someone that can actually speak for and act for the sake of nature. So, yeah, just a couple of things. I think one aspect of this is knowledge, and I don't just mean ecological knowledge, although I think the first talk we saw today was really inspiring for how we can empower local communities to collect evidence, ecological evidence and data to support their representations, but also like local knowledge, like intimate knowledge of these ecosystems, of the river. So that's one answer. It always should be local communities or people that live close by, not necessarily geographically, but in have an intimate relationship with the river. And I think this connects with a second aspect, which is any representative has to actually be able to act for the sake of the river. That means that not for some other interest, not for the sake of even human beings, but somehow be able to actually put aside human interest and act for the sake of the river. That's a really ambitious thing for anyone to do, and I'm sure no one's going to be able to do it absolutely perfectly. But it's exactly the same as being trying to be selfless in human relations. Right? We can try our best to try and act for the best of other people. We do it all the time, and it's just about learning to do that for a river rather than for other human beings.
Thank you, Neil. I'd like to go to Monica because she told us about the 12 guardians of the river, and so I'd love to hear more.
Yes. So I think this opening answer is already puts the finger on a very important question on the legitimacy aspect, and that's why I was suggesting that since you are thinking about the health of the river as such and their catchment areas, there should be geographic representation of all these sectors, because obviously you are not just concerned with one patch, but you are concerned with the river Ouse from source to mouth. That's obviously there's another element there as well when it comes to representation, and it has to do with gender. I think it is important, the example of Atrato, in the sense that it aimed to have gender representation. The work that women did in the Atrato case was extremely important. I didn't have the time to go into that, but I was quite amazed that this originated from the women who thought that that was the best way to protect the life of the community, the children. And really, in my experience, so far working with this community, I'm also in awe to see the women's participation here. And that, I think, is already seen in this panel of the Ouse and also councillor representation. So I think this is quite important. And when it comes to how was the model in the Trato River, there were elections. So the court was a little bit short, in terms of how many representatives there may be. They thought that 2. But the communities realized it's not going to work. You need more voices because you may have many roles. For example, there may be a possibility in this particular local council for the river to sit in planning meetings, let's say. So you may have one representative there, but there may be many other tasks where the voice of the river may be needed. So They decided in their own case that 14 representatives was a good number. You may decide something else. And it was election. So it was elected, democratically elected, appointed from the organizations that were already working with the river. And there is a good track a record of interest and connection with the river. So perhaps I just want to highlight that this is not the same as saying stakeholders, in the sense that it is the interest of the river that is represented. It's not the interest of individuals that is represented. So it's a shifting how you look at things. But the representation is there, and it can start in a very explorative way and build up from there, just as in this case, they discover what mechanism work for them. Finally, a word on the at the national level. In a certain way, you could say that we have handed stewardship somehow to government when it comes to central government. And government has, via statutory provisions, etc., created certain institutions that look after the implementation of legislation, etc. And in this country, obviously, we have the Environment Agency, we have other Natural England, etc. How does that work? I mean, obviously, they have a completely different role. But what this guardianship committee or group does is they monitor, they have an eye on it, they represent the river as a voice at local level, and they are able, therefore, if there is something that has overlapping with some legislation that may be existing, they bring this to the attention to some enforcement mechanisms that may exist and institutions that have the duty to do that, to enforce the law. Without this monitoring and central discussion and a space, those legislations are failing. So that is a kind of gap that the guardianship system can fulfill.
Thank you very much, Monica. I think Matthew wanted to say something.
I mean, I think the important thing is whether you think it's possible for the river to have a voice or representation. And I think it is. I mean, I think in the same way that children have rights, but they can't necessarily go and speak themselves, people are appointed to do that. So I think it is possible. I think then it's whether there are existing voices already and whether they are doing that job. So, you know, we have the Catchment Partnership, we have organisations who are working on behalf of the river. So it's whether or not maybe they could take forward Rights of the Rivers and be that voice, because then it leads on to the how. And it has been mentioned, you know, around, for instance, planning committees, you know, whether that voice, whether that representation can be there at those sorts of committees, and, you know, in all decisions that impact on the river. So I think those are the sort of three areas that we need to address. I think we have had guardians before. I mean, there are people who have been very tied up with the river and have been recognised as being an independent voice and authority for the river. So it's very possible to do it. It's just whether we can sort of change the current system we've got to enable that.
Thank you very much. Because of our fantastic panel, we're not going to have time for all the questions, so I'm going to use my chair's prerogative to handpick the question from here, which will turn the conversation a bit more back to front. What are the potential risks for / pitfalls to granting rights to nature or non-human entities? So that's a big one. Emma.
Yes, I saw this question come up, and on a very personal level, I actually really can't see any pitfalls. I'm sure in practice they will come around, but if 100 years ago you had asked that question about human rights and said, what are the pitfalls of human rights? I think, and I hope that we would have answered, we have to do this. As Monica said, we're looking back to the Second World War and what happened there, and we are in an abusive relationship with nature. There is no question that human beings abuse their position with nature, and we have to turn this round somehow. And rights of nature, rights of rivers is a new way of thinking about this. And if you want to ask me about pitfalls, I'll say, well, look at the other side of it, and there are your pitfalls. We have to go forward.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Well-deserved round of applause. Neil. Oh, Monica.
Yes, and if you look at the big picture, and I told you before it was said, I was acting in a number of climate change cases, so I don't just look at England, I look at the thing globally. I think we are in very threatening times, in times that action really is required. And we need that at all levels. It happens that if it's not happening at a national level, then it's got to start somewhere. I believe that the rate of loss of biodiversity is so fast around the world, and particularly nowadays, people are losing track of that. It's happening so fast that we are not even conscious about that. And this is going to lead to an even deeper crisis. So I think we are at a crossroads. We cannot but have a new approach. And if we had the 1945 moment with human rights development, and we are realizing that environmental law, as it's been implemented for decades, hasn't worked really. I've been in so many different litigation cases at present where we are even trying to argue environmental laws via human rights. But we have to twist this way because we cannot do that sometimes directly. Therefore, I'm persuaded, and this is where I ended up as a lawyer, that this is the way of preserving not just human beings, but preserving the environment we rely on for being alive and for ensuring that the planet is alive. So I think that we are at a crucible, and it is up to each of us, really, for what is going to happen in the near future. I say near future because I don't even think about future generations. I'm talking in our own lifespan.
Thank you very much. Emily?
Thank you, yes. So I don't think there's any pitfalls to giving rights to nature either, and I suppose that's not a surprise. You know, I'm a Green Party councillor. I'm also a national spokesperson for the Green Party. And in our policy, the number one, under, you know, wildlife and habitats policy, the number one kind of statement of principles is recognition of the rights of nature, and the number one action is a Rights of Nature Act that enshrines this in law. So it's no surprise that I absolutely believe this needs to happen. I haven't got so much a pitfall as I suppose a concern about the fact that I think what we need is this legal status in national law. And I suppose I have a frustration that we don't have more law-making opportunities locally. You know, despite being in the position of power within Lewes District Council, I cannot make the laws that we need to make that happen. So what we're all working so hard to do, and what today is so brilliant because it helps us to do that, is to work out, well, what do our solutions look like locally? You know, how can we influence that national agenda? How can that national agenda, as we heard in Colombia, work with the amazing community energy, the people in this room, the people who are out there who do so much? How do we do that? But I suppose I haven't got a pitfall, but I have a concern that what we do locally is able to influence that ultimate national goal effectively, because for me that would be the real win that would come out of this.
Thank you very much. Pete.
Hello, is this one working?
Try that one.
They're working against me. They don't want me to say anything. I agree entirely with Emily. I don't see there's any pitfalls to doing this or getting to the end result, but I think there are many pitfalls along the way of actually making this successful. I think if you ask anybody in this room who works on this river, and I can see quite a few people, there's lots of really good projects going on this river, and we've got the Will to Waves project, the Wilder Ouse project, which is a wildlife trust project, and we're doing lots of stuff on the river as well. And then you've got people like Ben who are obviously taking things into their own hands. I think it's really important, if you ask any of us, if there was a lot more money around and a lot more clarity over the opportunities that exist and the mechanisms by which you can actually make this happen, that there would be a lot more going on and there'd be a lot more positivity. And I think it's really important that we don't forget that actually this does need to be backed by an understanding of the financial implications on actually doing this, the mechanisms by which landowners need to be incentivised or compensated for putting their land into different land uses, and the different ways that can actually work. So I think that there are many pitfalls to success, but that doesn't mean to say that, as Matthew's already said, a lot of these things take many years from being unknown to being kind of accepted. So it shouldn't put us off, but we must be careful about how we collectively approach this so that we don't alienate people or actually stop or disrupt a lot of the very good work that's already happening across the catchment.
Thank you very much. Now we've got 5 minutes left of this session, so... Oh, sorry, no.
It's okay. I agree with everything that's been said. I don't need to add to it. Let's move on to another question.
Now, we've got, I'm sure you agree, an amazing panel and an incredible opportunity here to look at some of the details. So we're going to have time probably just for one question. So I'm going to just do a lucky dip. So hands up if you have a question, and there you go. First hand up, the lady in the green top. There's a microphone coming to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Isabel Carlisle from the River Dart in Devon. We've been looking at the possibility of changing the law around environmental impact assessments within planning legislation, because to my mind the question always is, which part of the legal system do you insert the leverage of rights of nature into? I'd love anyone on the panel to comment on whether you think making the carrying capacity of rivers a crucial piece of legislation that planners have to take account of when proposing any new planning legislation. Would that help our rivers?
Amazing question. Gosh, that was a good lucky dip. Emma, I think Emma, we'll go for Emma first and then the rest of the panel.
When you talk about environmental impact assessments, the government is actually consulting at the moment, or has already consulted about changing the nature of the environmental impact assessment, if that's actually what you're talking about in planning terms, to environmental outcome reports. And there is some concern that, as has been the case over some years, environmental impact assessments are continually being undermined. Obviously, they were brought in under a European directive, and actually also about Aarhus Convention about good participation in environmental decision making. So I have some concerns already around environmental impact assessments anyway. But yes, I mean, that sounds like a really interesting idea, that, you know, that within the decision-making process, that the water systems are not ignored. Now, we have our National Planning Policy Framework, which is something that the Environmental Law Foundation worked with Emily over, about identifying within that whether there is scope for decision makers to really push the water companies on whether or not there is capacity in the sewage system, because of course every planning decision that comes before a committee, that question has to be answered, and more often than not the utility provider just, yes, there's capacity. Well, there is only capacity because you chuck it all out into the environment. So there's a lot around the planning system. The planning system is really complex. It certainly doesn't serve the purposes of our rivers currently, and I think, yeah, in broad terms, we'd love to see some sort of change in legislation to take more account of the rivers. So yeah, it's a bit miserable, really. Sorry.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. And yes, I'd say yes, like Emma. I just wanted to give a kind of local perspective because on the whole planning thing, because as Emma says, it's something that I've been really involved in campaigning around, including as a councillor. I think I get really endlessly frustrated with the planning system. And I'm sorry, anyone who knows me knows that sooner or later this conversation is going to start talking about poo. And I think we're just about to do that. So I apologise for that. But one of the really frustrating things about our planning system is it does not allow us as a local authority, as the planning authority, to consider the impact of sewage discharge when we make a planning decision, because something called the duty to connect means that there is an assumption within the planning system that the water companies will deal with the waste, and that is just a legal obligation for them to do, but they are failing their legal obligation. So we can't change that locally. I should say the Environmental Law Foundation are amazing in helping us to get legal advice around this, but all we can really do is spotlight that situation. But what we can do is, although our local planning system is also very frustrating, and I sometimes call our planning system a national system disguised as local accountability. So as councillors, we get all the blame for bad planning decisions, when actually what we have to do is nearly always follow the national rules. But we do have some scope within our local planning policy. And so I suppose it's a bit of an appeal. We're going out to consultation for a preferred options draft on our next local plan at the end of November. It's got some really strong policies in it. One of them in particular is more aimed at helping other places. So there's a policy that we're asking people, would it be a good idea to include a policy that requires EIAs, environmental impact assessments, or much stronger environmental safeguards for intensive livestock units? Actually, for the ewes, I don't think, and people correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that is the biggest problem here. I don't think it is waste from intensive livestock units that is the biggest problem for the ewes, but it is killing other rivers, including the Wye. So it's really important that we get some of these policies past the inspector in an area where it might be easier to do, to help other places where they desperately need those policies to get them through. So please do support that. And apparently, I did check, and apparently people can respond from anywhere. And then the other one is around looking at the impact of sewage. We've spent quite a lot of money getting quite a detailed evidence base about poo, basically. And we would really like to have some very strong local policy building on the work that we've done, including with the Environmental Law Foundation. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to have to draw it to a close there, so I'm going to end by thanking each of you, for all of you in different ways, for progressing this kind of work on globally for Monica at the end, and nationally, and most important for us here in this room, the local aspect, to have a district council, a town council, all championing for this work, local NGOs, local landowners, an amazing array. So thank you very much, everybody. That was a great discussion, and enjoy your lunch.